The House Appropriations Subcommittee on Human Services will come to order. Will the clerk please call the roll for today's attendance?
Chair Roth.
Here.
Representative Kelly.
Here.
Representative Mueller.
Here.
Representative Beeson. Representative DeSanta. Representative Edwards.
Here.
Representative Longjohn.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Appreciate it. We're going to talk about the rules here quickly. The House Appropriations Subcommittee on Human Services will follow the uniform committee rules stated in Chapter 4 of the House Rules that were adopted on the House floor and the applicable rules adopted by the Appropriations Committee. With that said, I wanted to, there we go. Welcome all to the Human Services Committee. Appreciate you all being here today. Honored to be able to chair this committee. I wanted to make sure that everyone will be heard. I want every question to be answered that we can answer, and we will do that by whoever is first asking for a question. We want this to be very open and want to do this in a very fair, honest way. So I want to encourage very respectful discussion to ensure that the money that we get from taxpayers is wisely used and efficiently used. Look forward to serving all of you, and with that, let's get started. So today, we're going to have a presentation, Human Service Budget Appropriations, Sydney Brown, Fiscal Analysis from the House Fiscal Agency, and Cassidy Achman, also Fiscal Analyst from the House Fiscal Agency, will give us a presentation on our part of the budget this year. So thank you all. Whenever you're ready, ladies, please start.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. As the chair said, I'm Sydney Brown. I'm joined by Cassidy Uchman. We're from House Fiscal Agency, and we're going to go over the fiscal year 2024-25, so current year appropriations for the human services portion of the DHHS budget. I will note that this presentation you have before you is an abridged version. The full version is available on the HFA website. So the human services budget is comprised of child welfare programming, public assistance, juvenile justice, and disability determination and local office operations. The human services budget has a gross appropriation of $7.3 billion and a general fund appropriation of $1.3 billion. That is the rest of the funding is a combination of federal, local, and private and state restricted funds and interdepartmental grants from MyLeap, Department of Corrections, and DTMB. So as this slide shows, 80% of the $7.3 billion human services portion of the budget is federal funding, with the next largest percentage, 18%, coming from general fund. A majority of that federal funding is from TANF, which spans across public service and child welfare areas, as well as the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, also known as SNAP, which is mostly focused in the public assistance areas. I got it. The human services portion of the budget represents about 9% of the total $81.4 billion state budget. The health and human services budget as a whole makes up about 46% of the state's total budget. This slide shows the general fund appropriations in relation to the rest of the budget. So the human services portion of the budget also represents 9% of the $14.9 billion general fund appropriation for the whole budget. And again, it's about 45% of the total state budget. So as I mentioned before, the appropriation areas that we will touch on are public assistance, child welfare, which includes foster care, adoption, family preservation, guardianship assistance, juvenile justice, local office operations, which deals with the local offices of DHHS, and community services. So the $7.3 billion human services portion of the DHHS budget has about 62% of that supports public assistance programs. With this, I should mention that this number also includes one-time funding, so about $45.6 million of this gross amount is from one-time funding that would go away after this year if it is not work projected. The $1.3 billion general fund appropriations is more heavily concentrated within the child welfare space. As you can see, it's about 63% of the general fund appropriation for human services. And it also supports a majority of local office operations. And it's less concentrated in public assistance, but there's a lot of federal funding that runs through public assistance. So we'll start with some of our major budget topics. I'll hand it over to Cassidy, who's going to speak on the TANF.
Next slide. So, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, is a federal block grant established in 1996 to assist families with minor children or pregnant women. Michigan's annual grant amount is $773 million, and the state can use those dollars to meet any of TANF's 4 official purposes. Those purposes are to provide assistance to needy children and families so that children may be cared for in their homes or by their families, to end families' dependence on government benefits, to reduce out-of-wedlock pregnancies, and to encourage the formation and maintenance of two-parent families. To receive TANF funds, the state must develop an annual plan that outlines the details of a cash assistance program for needy families. In Michigan, that's the Family Independence Program, or FIP, which I'll go into more detail in later. States have quite a bit of flexibility on eligibility standards and payment amounts for this program, but the plan must include work requirements for parents receiving cash assistance benefits. Additionally, states must maintain at least the federal 60-month lifetime limit on TANF assistance. Michigan had previously set a 48-month limit on TANF benefits beginning in fiscal year 2008, but it just increased the limit back up to 60 months effective this year. Next slide. So another key component of TANF is state maintenance of effort, or MOE, which is required to draw down that federal grant. States can claim any spending that reasonably achieves those 4 TANF goals and serves needy children and families as MOE. So this slide provides an overview of statewide funding for TANF and TANF MOE. Historically, Michigan has dedicated a substantial share of TANF and MOE to K-12 at-risk and school readiness programs, and to post-secondary scholarships, seen in the lightest blue and the orange on these slides. In fiscal year 24 and 25, however, that spending has largely been redirected to other areas. The Earned Income Tax Credit increase in fiscal year 2024 was claimed as MOE, as seen in the growth of the light blue bar at the top of the graph. And federal TANF dollars have moved towards public assistance programs, nearly doubling TANF expenditures in that area. Overall, for fiscal year 2025, our total appropriated spending for TANF and TANF MOE combined is over $1.3 billion. So next we're going to do a quick overview of the major public assistance programs, those being Family Independence Program, Food Assistance Program, State Disability Assistance, and State Emergency Relief Programs. So first up, as discussed, FIP is the cash assistance program for households with dependent children. A household must meet income and asset requirements to qualify. This fiscal year, a family of 3, for example, would need an income under $925 a month, or about $11,100 annually, and financial assets of less than $15,000 and real property assets of less than $200,000 to qualify. States do have a lot of discretion over the program design, and Michigan has implemented a couple of changes to ensure that the state meets federal work requirements for the program. First, some of a household's earned income from work, is disregarded in determining the benefit amount and the closure of a case. This ensures that families won't be immediately removed from assistance if they successfully land a job or pick up more hours and their work income increases a little bit. Second, a portion of FIP cases are funded with general fund dollars rather than TANF, and those cases don't have to be counted towards the workforce participation rate that we report to the feds. Next slide, please. So this graph breaks down FIP's funding sources. As mentioned, FIP is largely funded by TANF, about 86%, and that includes $10 million and $23.2 million to support an annual children's clothing allowance and a per-child supplemental payment, respectively. As mentioned, about 5% of FIP's total budget is general fund, and maintaining those state-funded cases helps to ensure that Michigan doesn't face penalties for failing to meet the work participation requirement. The remainder is restricted, and that's public assisted recoupments, so money that's been overpaid being clawed back. It also includes SSI recruitment for if someone has been on FIP and gets on federal SSI, those benefits are retroactively clawed back. So FIP caseloads have been steadily trending downwards due to the imposition of lifetime limits, other policy changes, and economic conditions. This year, the estimated monthly caseload is 11,448 households. For a reference point, that's down from about 28,500 10 years ago. Expenditures did increase by almost $40 million in this fiscal year due to an 18.5% increase in the payment standards for FIP and an expansion of the child supplement payments. But otherwise, expenditures have largely trended downwards alongside the caseload. So the Food Assistance Program, or FAP, is a federally funded program to supplement low-income individuals and families' ability to purchase food. While states have a lot of leeway in administering cash assistance, food assistance is largely set by federal guidelines. Generally, households with income below 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, about $52,000 annually for a family of three, and less than $15,000 in financial assets will qualify. The benefit amount is calculated through a federal formula, and it can be used to purchase SNAP-eligible food from approved retailers or meal providers. Caseloads for food assistance have been generally trending downwards until fiscal year 2020 and the pandemic, but they've since increased about 19.2% from pre-pandemic levels. The most recent numbers through January, Michigan's monthly food assistance caseload for this year is at 754,475. State disability assistance is cash assistance for disabled adults who are permanently or temporarily unable to work. This is 100% state funded, with both general fund dollars and restricted revenues, like those SSI recoupments. Again, applicants must meet asset and income limits to qualify, about $7,200 in annual income for a single adult. New cases starting in fiscal year 2012 receive a maximum monthly benefit of $200 for a single adult, but payment levels are higher for individuals in special living arrangements like adult foster care or homes for the aged. Like FIP, SDA caseloads have steadily declined over the last decade plus, with a temporary bump during the pandemic. This is in part because federal SSI approvals have increased, so individuals are spending less time waiting to move into the federal program. For the current fiscal year, the SDA monthly caseload is estimated at 2,129 cases. Finally, state emergency relief refers to programs that assist applicants with maintaining essentials when emergencies arise. Like the other assistance programs, there are income and asset requirements for eligibility, which vary depending on the type of service. The income threshold for energy assistance services is at 150% of the federal poverty level, while the requirement for non-energy services is lower, with a recipient copay required if income exceeds that standard. Non-energy services include diaper assistance, indigent burials, emergency housing costs, among other programs. These are funded through a mix of TANF, some other federal programs, and general fund dollars, with $71.6 million gross appropriated for these purposes in fiscal year 2025. Energy assistance services are made up of the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program, LIHEAP, federal block grant, and the Michigan Energy Assistance Program. LIHEAP funds direct energy assistance, the Heat and Eat program, the home heating tax credit, and some weatherization services. MEEP provides additional direct energy assistance and self-sufficiency services. Funding for MEEP is appropriated from the State Low-Income Energy Assistance Fund, which draws from a surcharge on energy utility bills through participating providers. $225 million gross was appropriated for energy assistance in fiscal year 2025.
All right, buckle up. We're going into child welfare. So the child welfare programs are focused around foster care, the child care fund, which also does foster care and juvenile justice programming, as well as adoption subsidies and the family preservation and prevention services. I will say the caseload bearing lines there are going to be the foster care, adoption, and child care fund and guardianship assistance lines. So family preservation is not caseload driven. So for foster care, provide supervision for children who cannot maintain or cannot remain in their homes. TANF law requires that states administer a foster care program. You could also argue that it is a constitutionally required program. The foster care line item, so foster care payments, supports court wards and eligible for federal funds and state wards or other court wards. Cases that are funded through the child care fund line. So it's a little bit confusing, but there are youth who are removed from the home and placed in the care of the court, and there are youth who are removed from the home and placed in the care of DHHS, and that will affect the funding that is available to that child or to follow that child. So the big federal funding sources is Title 4E. That meets about 65% of the out-of-home placement costs for youth. 4E funds are dependent on how the child is removed from the home. If there's a court order of removal, there's a list of requirements, and it's mostly dependent on how the youth was removed. 4E funds and foster care payments in general will fund foster care programming, maintenance payments, agency, administrative rates, and things like that. The standard per diem for the maintenance payments for foster care, adoptive family, and guardianship assistance program volunteers or participants is based on age, but it's between $22 and $28, and that's 0 to 13, 14 to 17. There is independent living per diems that youth who choose to stay in foster care but live independently, they get that maintenance payment. And then there's additional determination of care payments that families can apply for if there are extra needs that the child has that maintenance payments don't cover. And maintenance payments generally are paid out every 2 weeks, but it's a daily accrual. So for the foster care funding sources, you can see that 60% of the $330.8 million for the foster care program is general fund, with 34 funded by federal revenue, and that's made up of the Title 4E revenue that I discussed earlier, Title 20, which is the social services block grant, TANF, which Cassidy covered previously, as well as Title 4B, which generally focuses on family preservation and reunification efforts, as well as foster family attainment. The foster care caseload and spending trends is a little bouncy. You can see for fiscal year 25, the costs have increased. They've steadily increased every year. It just costs more to care for a child, even though caseloads have been dropping. You can see they've gone up a little bit. But they are kind of coming back up to trend post-COVID. So it's not necessarily a huge increase that we're dealing with here. You'll see in fiscal year 20, there was a jump, and that came from the statutory change that unlicensed relatives are to be paid foster care rates. So prior to that, maintenance payments could only be paid to licensed family foster care providers. So with that change, and we see that most children are placed with relatives, unlicensed relatives, who can now receive the financial assistance of a maintenance payment. Moving into the child care fund, this provides care and treatment for adjudicated delinquent youth, as well as neglected and abused children, the same as the foster care payments line. This is generally for those foster youth who are not Title IV-E eligible. So the court decided something about their removal, or the way that they were placed doesn't make them eligible for 4E payments. So they still get those maintenance payments, but they're paid out of the child care fund line. So this is the other caseload line that I mentioned earlier. The child care fund reimburses counties 50% for their eligible costs incurred for out-of-home placements, and most recently, thanks to a statutory change, reimburses counties 75% for in-home care services, and that's intervention services, community-based supports, and things that will allow the child to stay in the home and help that family who is at risk of possible maltreatment. I will note that the state is required to pay child care funds to the counties first, and then the counties will reimburse for their portion. So for in-home care, the state pays those funds first, and then the county reimburses 25%. This is the child care fund spending trends for the last, I believe, 15 years. You'll see in fiscal year 24 and 25 costs, the general fund cost made a jump, and that was a result of the statutory change for in-home care services, the reimbursement being changed to 75%. And then there was also the statutory change in fiscal year 20 that made the state the first payer. So state pays first happened in fiscal year 20, and you'll also see a little bit of a jump there as well. Moving into the adoption subsidy program, this helps address financial barriers for adopting eligible foster children. So if a child is considered to have special needs or needs additional physical behavioral health supports, medical supports, the family can go through their local DHHS to receive adoption subsidy payments that will help non-Medicaid and non-private insurance program or services be paid for. The child must be SSI eligible or AFDC eligible. And if anybody's wondering, the AFDC stands for Aid to Families with Dependent Children, and that was replaced by TANF in 1996. But we still use those standards to assess a child's eligibility for certain services. So you can see of the $232.4 million adoption subsidies program funding, 67% is funded by federal revenue, and there's 4E again. You'll see Title 4E funding across the entirety of child welfare, and then in addition to that, there is also TANF funding, as well as general fund. The adoption subsidy caseload and spending trends, you'll see much with foster care, much with child care fund. The cost of caring for a child has gone up, even as caseloads have declined. I would say the caseloads declining for adoption is not necessarily because less kids are getting adopted. There is also just less kids in foster care. And lastly, the family preservation programs, a non-caseload line. This is $78.5 million was appropriated for family preservation programming. 67% of this was TANF. The most recent increase was in the fiscal year 25 budget. I believe it was around $8.5 million in TANF. To increase family preservation programming, and that is family reunification, strong families, safe children, and it's just basically coaches families on how to help their children thrive within the home. Now we move into juvenile justice programs. This is for care and supervision of state wards aged 12 to 21. The state runs what was 2 facilities. I'm I'm sure some of you have heard about the closure of the Shawano Center. So now the only state-run facility that would be left would be Bay Pines. That does not mean that there is only one agency or one center that is doing juvenile justice in the state. The state does contract with private residential juvenile justice providers. And you can see on this slide the juvenile justice expenditures over time. This is basically the cost for running the juvenile justice facilities and general JJ operations. The dip that starts in fiscal year 16 is a result of more community-based diversion programming, so those family preservation programs I mentioned earlier coming into play and diverting a number of youth from the juvenile justice system. And this slide is the days of care, so how many days a youth was in care at a juvenile justice facility. Obviously, the only two that were operational when I had this data were the Bay Pines and Shawano centers, which is why the colors stayed the same there after 2016 or after 2015. And now we move into local office operations.
Next slide. So DHHS has over 100 local and district human services offices across the state. These offices process public assistance applications and monitor case files. They oversee foster care and protective services cases, and they administer other human services programs. So basically, they do all of the sort of on-the-ground field work. Accordingly, there's a lot of FTEs in this section of the human services budget, and personnel costs accounted for 13% of total human services appropriations in fiscal year 2024. In particular, the settlement of the children's rights suit against Michigan required reductions in caseload to worker ratios for child welfare, which has contributed significantly to staffing increases in recent years. Finally, we move into child support enforcement. Operation of a child support enforcement program to establish and enforce support orders is an additional federal requirement to receive TANF. The MDHHS Office of Child Support administers the program and contracts with local prosecuting attorneys and friends of the court. TANF families are required to participate in the child support program, but any family may request child support services. Michigan has elected to waive the application fee for those non-TANF families, replacing that revenue with general fund. In fiscal year 2024, approximately $1.3 billion of child support was collected and dispersed to families in Michigan. So the overall funding sources for child support enforcement, overall $235.4 million total was appropriated for child support enforcement. The bulk of that is federal Title 4D funding. That requires a state match, which is split between the state and counties. The other chunk of funding that you see is federal incentives. So that is federal funding for good state performance on various child support metrics, and that funding is split between the state and the counties as well.
And with that, we're available for any questions.
Thank you very much, both of you ladies, for the presentation. And everybody got that, right? You all got it? Okay, good. Question for me first to start with, Sydney. Thank you. Percentage of line items that are multiply funded with different, like TANF, 4E, whatever. You have any idea? I know we didn't talk about it the other day, but
I can get that for you.
Yeah.
I'm going to say a majority of them, just as a rough estimate, but I can get that for you.
which just means we have to find creative ways. The other one that I was want to make sure we're clear on that I wanted to ask was the foster care unlicensed providers. So they still are checked out by
Yes.
CPS or DHHS, but they don't have to go through the whole program or the
licensure.
The licensure.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
So if there is a court order for removal,
Yeah.
and if the courts and DHHS are involved in the removal and the placement of the child, they can place them with unlicensed relatives who then DHHS is going to check out the home. That family is going to get maintenance payments. They just don't have to be a licensed family foster care provider because of their kinship relation to the child.
But that wouldn't necessarily include a grandpa and grandma. They just took in grandson or daughter.
It would. Michigan doesn't participate in the voluntary foster care 4E program.
Appreciate that. I think I had one more, and then I'll open up to the members. So the child care fund, we pay it first, the state does, and then the counties reimburse. Have we had any issues with counties not repaying that? Or
Not that I'm
right away?
aware of. I
Okay.
can check on that.
Yeah.
I know the data, because of the state pays first, the data from the counties isn't always the best now, but I can check on that for you.
Okay, I appreciate it. Any members have questions? Vice Chair Kelly, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I have a couple questions here. The in different areas, the federal poverty guidelines range anywhere from 150 to 200%. Why the varying percentages? Would those not be a flat across all programs?
I believe there is a flat percentage set by the federal government, and then the legislature then has the discretion to change that based on program. So there's, you have to give 150%, but the legislature decided, hey, let's expand this program to 250% poverty, if that makes sense.
Okay, so it's our call.
I think for some of it. I'm
All
not
right.
going to say for all of it, but for some programming, yes.
All right. The second question then is about the TANF state option for hardships, and up to 20% of the caseload. Again, how is that determined?
So that's an option that states may choose to take. Michigan does not.
We don't.
We do not.
So okay. So that's here in Michigan. That doesn't have anything to do with it. Right?
Correct.
Oh, okay. All right. And then just to clarify, on page or slide 15, the overview of statewide TANF and TANF maintenance of effort talks about directed monies. MOE was directed away from scholarships and K-12 at-risk and school readiness programs.
Correct.
Can you tell me why?
So largely just policy choice to spend it differently.
I mean, they took these monies for this maintenance of effort, correct?
So maintenance of effort is,
The match.
it's the match.
Yeah.
The state can choose what state spending it claims as maintenance of effort.
Okay.
Because we aren't claiming K-12 at risk and school readiness programs as maintenance of effort doesn't mean we're still spending there. Like, we're still spending in those areas, we just aren't claiming it as maintenance of effort.
Okay. Had it been taken from other places prior to 23, 24, or 24, 25?
Can you clarify that question, please?
Well, I mean, you're taking, it looks to me like you're taking K-12 at-risk and school readiness program monies to use for maintenance of effort for TANF. Is that correct?
So you aren't.
Am I not?
Can you help me explain?
Yeah. So DHHS is not taking money from school aid. This is the statewide TANF spending. It happens to be in the DHHS Human Services presentation.
Oh, okay.
But this is the whole maintenance of effort for the whole state, of which K-12 programs has what we spend we consider to be maintenance of effort.
Oh, all right. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Vice Chair Edwards.
Thank you, sir. The federal level for TANF is 60 months, but we decreased it to 48 and then went back to 60. What was the negative and positive impact of that?
So I believe that would be more of a question for the department. I can say just as objective fact, it changes how many people are going to be able to stay on the program for, like it's going to impact caseloads.
Okay, my other one is with the closing of the Shawano Center, how would that money be allocated for the facility now be used?
So the youth that were, it is our understanding that the youth that were housed at Shawano will be moved to the Macomb facility that will be considered the Michigan Youth Treatment Center. We're still waiting to get clarification on exactly how the funding's going to change. There's some reported savings that we're checking up on. But that center, I don't know what comes of like the physical location. That center is just going to be closed. But those youth will be moved to Macomb.
To the representative's point, next week we plan on talking about juvenile justice, so we can dive into that further.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Beeson.
Thank you, Chair Roth. The SNAP funding that we get from the federal government, if we reduce people on the SNAP service, does that mean our federal funding goes down? Or is it directly related to how many people are on there?
So I don't believe that we really have the authority to reduce people who are on the service. The eligibility criteria are federal requirement. So if the caseloads go down, just if less people qualify, then we would simply get less money, but we don't make spending choices to make that happen.
Okay, so I know that you guys are just the financial, so when the district is up, we can find out what requires on the SNAPs. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, the Subcommittee on Health, Appropriations, Human Services will be over.